Namaskar, this is Akhilesh Bhargava again. Welcome to Tidbits on Business and Finance with me. The MSME sector, that is the micro, small and medium enterprises sector, is the backbone of the Indian economy. It is a significant contributor to the Indian GDP and is also a huge employment generator. The Reserve Bank of India, in a recent study, states that as at 31st March 2018, there were 63 million MSME units. There were 63 million such enterprises in India. They provided jobs to 111 million persons, which is 11 crores, and they contributed to 30% of our GDP. The Reserve Bank study also says that the MSME sector contributes to 45% of our manufacturing output and to 40% of our exports, which is a huge number. Despite such a preeminence of this sector, the MSME sector in India has no voice. It has little say in administration, policy making and legislation. Its voice is generally not heard and it is stifled and put down by the big enterprises. The big enterprises need them as ancillaries and so they let them survive, they don't let them thrive. And resultantly, the MSME sector, which is an expression of India's raw entrepreneurial dynamism, never reaches the kind of heights it ought to. The fact that 97% of such units are in the informal sector denies them a lot of institutional incentives and credits at times because they are in the informal sector. And one of the areas where they get a raw deal is bank lending. As at 31st March 2018, the credit exposure of NBFCs and banks to the MSME sector was 12.6 lakh crores. It may look to be a large number, but it constitutes only 23% of the exposure of banks that they have to the big corporate sector. These units do not get the kind of credit they need. And the reason is that banks are averse to lending to the MSMEs. They insist on 100% collateral security by way of mortgage of a property, pledge of bank fixed deposits or shares or investments or any other form of security to match the loan amount given, and they also insist on a personal guarantee of the borrower. The MSME entrepreneurs have a far better track record of integrity with banks, but banks still look at them with a jaundiced eye. They are denied the credit they need, they are denied the credit again when they are growing, they are denied access to credit, and they are denied growth opportunities merely by the banks insisting on 100% collateral. Now, if you compare the scenario of the small and the big enterprises, it is a study in contrast. In the case of a small entrepreneur, he is asked to put up 100% collateral security by the banks. In the case of the big borrowers, perhaps the security is nil very often. The banks, in the case of the big borrowers, do not get a collateral security very often, and if they get, it is a minuscule of the exposure that the bank has on the big enterprise. All that the banks have is security by way of assets financed by their own loans, which is no security at all. The personal guarantee of small entrepreneurs is always insisted upon, but that doesn't happen in the case of the big borrowers. The small borrower is directly accountable, accessible to the bank. The big borrower has the likes of Vijay Mallya who even run away. Their accessibility to the bank, their personal accountability to the bank is very low. And in the case of a small entrepreneur, even if there is a hint of a default, the bank chooses to initiate the harshest recovery measures to recover these loans. That doesn't happen in the case of a big borrower. If a big borrower defaults, he is given fresh loans to repay the old loans, and he is given restructuring after restructuring to somehow prevent a default, even though it has already taken place. It is a completely different situation. That is why in a recent FICCI seminar, a lady participant lamented that even though she had been in business for the last 20 years, she still doesn't get bank loans without putting up 100% collateral security, and that denies her growth opportunities. In a recent case that we are aware of, a small entrepreneur was on the verge of getting a huge order from ONGC. He was technically very qualified, ONGC needed that kind of a contractor, but he was denied a bank loan only because he couldn't put up 100% collateral security for the bank. The contractor, a small entrepreneur, could not take up the ONGC order. And that is the story of many an entrepreneurs. Compared to the large enterprise exposures that the banks have, the small enterprise exposure is a far safer one because the banks are secured. The banks are secured by way of a collateral security. The banks are secured by way of personal guarantees of the entrepreneurs. And these entrepreneurs do not siphon away funds blatantly and in such large numbers as the big enterprises do, as we have seen in cases of Lanco, Bhushan Steel, Bhushan Power, and the list is unending. Despite that, recently Mr. Uday Kotak, Asia's richest banker now, commented and said that the banks face a significant risk of their exposure to the small and medium enterprises because of a significant overvaluation of the collateral securities. In other words, he says that the banks will imminently suffer losses because of their exposures to the MSME units because the collateral securities are highly overvalued. Mr. Kotak would be right, but for very different reasons. The overvaluation is looking now only because the valuations in the real estate sector have fallen. It is not that at the inception the bank sacrificed 100% collateral security. The second reason why he could be right, but for very different reasons, is the default by the MSME sector, if it happens, is because of two reasons. They are being denied access to bank credit. They are not able to make the most of growth opportunities because there has been a huge buildup of inequality in the Indian economy in recent years. The big have grown much bigger, the small have grown smaller, and they are being denied opportunities. And if opportunities are denied to a running enterprise, a default could happen. The other reason why the defaults could happen in the present scenario has been that the overall environment of the economy continues to be oppressive and difficult for the small and medium enterprises, particularly in the wake of the onslaught of the twin measures of the government of demonetization and GST. So, defaults could happen in the MSME sector, but the reasons will be very bona fide, and the overvaluation of collateral security, if any, is incidental. It has not been intentional, as we have seen in the case of the big enterprises who have actually looted the country. This is Akhilesh Bhargava signing off till we meet again. Namaskar.